Hi everyone, it's Miss Jones and welcome to our art lesson this week. This past weekend, I got to go to a farm. And at this farm, I saw so many wonderful things. They had all sorts of animals, a big red barn, and pumpkins. So many pumpkins. They had pumpkins as far as the eye could see. And this gave me an idea. For this project, let's capture the beauty of a farm in the fall by drawing our own pumpkin patch. So this week we practiced drawing both pumpkins and what we call landscapes. Landscape paintings and drawings are visual representations of natural scenery. These are things outside the city that we see in nature, like mountains, valleys, bodies of water like lakes and oceans, fields, and forests. Landscape drawings and paintings have been popular in art for a long time. Right now, we're in the 21st century, and it's said that these types of paintings originated back in the 4th century in China. Landscape art didn't even appear in the West until the 16th century. So we're going to continue this wonderful tradition today with our own drawing. So what you're going to need is a piece of paper, a pencil, crayons, and colored pencils. Before we get started, I'd like to look at work from another artist who became famous for his landscapes. Here we have a painting by Grant Wood called Fall Plowing. We can see that it's a painting of a farm field. When we look at this painting, we can see that the landscape is divided into 3 distinct parts. The first part is the part closest to the viewer and is lowest on the page. This is called the foreground. In the middle of the painting, we have what we call the middle ground. And finally, at the top of our painting, we have the background. Artists, like Grant, have a few tricks to making something look close and far away. To make something look closer to the viewer, we put it in the foreground. We also make the object fairly large. If you notice, something that's closer to you appears larger. Try taking your pencil. Place it by the tip of your nose. Now extend your arm and see how the pencil changes its size. Objects placed in the middle ground appear smaller than those in the foreground. As we move up the page, objects become smaller and smaller. We can see the barn in the background. Look how tiny it looks. A barn is by far larger than the plow that's in the foreground. But because of its placement and size, we understand that the barn is much farther away from us. The higher we put something on the painting, the farther away it feels. Because the barn is close to the sky, we know that it is farther away. Now that we've seen another artist's work and learned some tips and tricks to drawing landscapes, go ahead and grab your pencil. We're going to start our landscape drawing by dividing it into 3 sections: our foreground, middle ground, and background. So for our countryside landscape, we're going to draw some rolling hills. If you notice in Grant Wood's work, all of his paintings had these lush hills So we're going to start with our foreground, which is going to be at the bottom of our page. Our foreground is going to be the largest part of our drawing because it is the closest to us. So go to almost the halfway point of your paper and come down just slightly. Draw a big curved line across your paper. Here we have our foreground. Now we're going to move up the page and draw our middle ground. We want our middle ground to look more like a hill. So I'm going to start kind of close to my foreground line here and kind of make a big hill like that. So now you can see my middle ground is larger on one side and smaller on the other. Finally, we want to add our background, which is the farthest part away from our foreground and our viewer. So I'm going to add my background here and add just a little hill. So now I have my foreground, which is my part closest to the viewer, my middle ground in the middle of my paper, and my background, which is the highest up on my page. Now that I have set out the sections of my landscape, I can start adding my farm details. So I want to have my pumpkin patch in my foreground because I want those to stand out in my landscape. And if you've ever been to a pumpkin patch, they kind of have these rows. So I'm going to draw some pumpkin patch rows. And in my pumpkin patch, I need pumpkins. And these pumpkins are going to be fairly big because they're closest to me. So I'm going to draw a big pumpkin here. And pumpkins kind of have these lines on them. They're very round. Put a little stem and maybe some curly vines there. I'll add a second pumpkin next to it. Another trick how artists make something look closer is by overlapping their objects. So I'm overlapping this little pumpkin here and putting it in front of this bigger pumpkin. And that gives the illusion that this pumpkin is closer to us than this one. I'm also going to start adding more pumpkins in my foreground, but they're going to be higher up on my page, which means they're going to be a little bit smaller. And as I get higher up in my foreground, my pumpkins are going to get smaller and smaller. There is my pumpkin patch. I might add a little sign here. And we'll erase that part of that pumpkin because it's going to be in front. Now we can move on to our middle ground. So in our middle ground, we want to continue our fields of pumpkins because remember when I said I went to the farm this last weekend and there were so many pumpkins. They went on and on and on. So we want to keep our pumpkins going on and on and on. So we're going to keep drawing some smaller pumpkins. They're going to get smaller and smaller in our middle ground. So now we see we have our large pumpkins here in our foreground, and they're getting smaller and smaller into the background. Now in our background, we'll take inspiration from Grant Wood's work and also my trip to the farm, and we're gonna make a big red barn. But it's not gonna be big because it's gonna be in the background. So we want to draw our barn on our background, and it might be about the size of one of our biggest pumpkins, because in reality, a barn is significantly larger than an actual pumpkin, but this pumpkin and the barn will look the same size because of their placement and how far away they are. So I'm gonna draw my silo. A silo holds wheat or grain. Most farms have them. I'm gonna draw a barn door here. And a roof. I might have a little part on my barn too. There's my barn. And around the barn, I'm gonna put a fence. We'll put it on top of my hill. Because we're gonna draw some animals, and we wanna make sure our animals stay inside our farm. We'll stop our fence there. So let's draw some animals in our background. So you can think of different farm animals like horses, cows, maybe some sheep. I'm gonna draw some cows. And then I think I'm gonna draw another cow in the background, so I'm gonna make it even smaller. There we go, I got a few cows in my pasture there. And now we have our sky. So our sky is sort of part of our background because the sky is super far away. And we want to add something to make this look like a beautiful day or maybe a crisp fall night. So you can do either a nighttime sky or a daytime sky. So I think I'm gonna do a daytime sky because I have cows that are out and usually they'd be asleep. So I'm gonna draw a sun kind of in the middle of my picture here. Maybe it's morning time. I think I'm gonna do a morning scene. Then maybe I'll do some clouds. We'll do some big clouds that are up closer and some smaller clouds. Ta-da! So there is my drawing. Now that I have my drawing in pencil, I can start to go over it and color it. If you'd like to outline your drawing, you can, to make the lines look a little bit more crisp. Or you can jump straight into using your colored pencils and crayons to color your artwork. have your very own pumpkin patch landscape. We created a foreground, a middle ground, and background. We practiced making things closer, look closer to us, and things looking farther away, using size and placement on our page. So good work, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this activity, and now you have a beautiful landscape to display in your home for the rest of the fall season. Thanks, everyone. Bye.